Brown. I'm a psychiatrist. I've worked with workplaces, organizations, problems that arise around work and unemployment for 25 plus years. Currently serve, among other things, as department psychiatrist for the Boston Police Department, and also consult a variety of government and private organizations. Well, what we can expect to see, I think, is an amplification of many of the problems that we see with job loss and worklessness that we have seen historically, more generally. One of the things that when one studies, when one works with people who are unemployed, and when one studies worklessness more generally, what one sees is that there's an initial shock of that comes with job loss that's very difficult for people to tolerate. But then, when worklessness is prolonged, when it's prolonged and it becomes a chronic reality-based problem, you see a variety of other psychological, psychiatric illnesses and morbidities that arise even among people who don't necessarily have a history of psychiatric disorder, or who aren't necessarily vulnerable to psychiatric disorder. Now, for I specifically will see an amplification of these problems because it won't just be we won't just have individuals who are suffering as a result of job loss once or twice. We can expect serial job loss and chronic uncertainty, and therefore chronic anxiety about one's future in the workplace, one's future capacity to sustain oneself economically and socially. And with that, we'll see um, a spreading of uh, uh, an unstable identity. It will no longer be possible for people to develop a coherent and sustainable personal narrative about their professional identity, because the ability to contribute to the workforce so unstable, so fragmented, and so temporary. So many of the problems with AI-generated work loss essentially amount to chronic instability and uncertainty and chronic difficulties with identity. The sense of usefulness will also become a problem. With what we see now, or up until AI has been developed, is that people often find it, especially in mid-career or late career, it's extremely difficult to develop a new skill set if the skill set that one has developed historically becomes rendered obsolete. What we'll see with AI is that not only will one have to develop a new skill set once or twice, but there will be this serial um, uh, 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 way in which skills that are developed are suddenly become rendered useless. So the capacity to develop skills and skillfulness will become chronically threatened because there's no way of knowing which skills will be valued in the workplace. And the fifth idea is that, and the fifth expectation is that the depression and the rage and the anger that we have historically seen with job loss and worklessness and unemployment will be scaled up essentially, and will be compounded by the growth and proliferation of ideologies. People will cling to ideologies as a way of developing a coherent understanding to explain why there is so much distress and suffering associated with worklessness. And AI and the other technologies that will converge and be developed with AI can be expected to intensify the kind of divisions that we see with the proliferation of ideologies and ideologically based thinking and reasoning. Yeah, the reason why it's reasonable to expect these developments is that we already know about the consequences of job loss, unemployment, and worklessness. I've studied the problem and I've worked with the problem for over 25 years. And there's absolutely no reason to expect that the kind of problems one sees with unemployment, job loss, and worklessness won't be magnified with AI for all the reasons we've already discussed. The reason why so many of the impacts are negative is not necessarily because the people and the factors and the forces that are driving technological innovation are necessarily malevolent or necessarily intentionally harmful. But the outcomes many of the outcomes will inevitably be harmful because the actors and the group of actors that are developing these technologies, their objectives and their cares and what they're paying attention to, these objective cares and points of attention are completely indifferent to mental health outcomes in particular, or even the best interests of humanity collectively or generally. And so I think that's very important to remember. The reason why so many of these outcomes are antithetical to positive mental health is uh, positive mental health and human flourishing are objectives that are just not being attended to by the developers of these technologies. I think one of the most important threats is to reality contact, both individually and collectively. It's important to keep in mind, and I think folks one of the problems that with unemployment and worklessness that's not immediately obvious to people, but that becomes obvious when you work with this problem is one of the central uh, healthful aspects of workforce participation is reality contact. And when people are unemployed for prolonged periods of time, that's threatened. That has always been the case. But what's new is that AI is going to pose an even larger threat to reality contact because in order to develop reality contact, there needs to be a consensually validated reality that everybody agrees upon. And what we're going to see, we already see to some degree with social media, this problem is going to be amplified where our ability to even assess whether somebody is in contact with reality will be challenged because we won't necessarily have a consensually validated reality. We'll have, with AI augmentation of reality, numerous competing narratives regarding what constitutes reality. The second problem that we'll see with AI doesn't relate necessarily to just multiple competing narratives or even false reality, but that the ideational content produced by AI can be harmful. And the analogy that I use to think about it is you think about what the effect of junk food, think about a diet that consists exclusively of junk food or ultra processed food, what that can be reasonably expected to do to the body. Think about what the human body would be like if the only thing that is taken in is cotton candy, popcorn, and pretzels, for example. Well, that you can think of the human mind the same way. If the human mind is inundated by nothing but uh, uh, poor quality content or false content, you can reasonably expect very poor outcomes in terms of what psychiatrists just call thought content, right? Or ideational content. And the third problem that can reasonably be expected to develop, and that we're already seeing to some degree, is in the attentional domain. Um, People are going to be perpetually distracted from what really matters, both individually and collectively. And because folks who develop AI are principally interested in capturing attention, in inducing dependence, and extracting information and deriving revenues from people who use the service, it's going to undermine our already fragile capacity to cultivate. And the first thing to keep in mind is that the threats that are posed by AI are not only relevant to vulnerable people, people with a history of mental illness, or people with a who are somehow vulnerable to psychiatric disorder. It's something that is going to threaten the mental health of everyone. And so, habits, practices, and behaviors that conduce to mental clarity and well-being will really need to be cultivated by everybody, not just folks who are vulnerable. The second thing, and this is really important, and it's unfortunate that this hasn't been developed in our culture already. It should have been, we should have been thinking along these lines many decades ago, but we need to cultivate critical thinking and good decision making and judgment about technology and the threats that technological innovation poses skills and human capacities. And that sounds very fancy and complicated, but it isn't. It's simple. It's actually very, very simple. Well, it can be more complicated when we're dealing with organizations and technological innovation in the workplace, but it can also be very, very simple when we're thinking about it on a more individual and personal basis. It only requires that we always keep at the forefront of our innovation, in the forefront of our imagination, that is, every single technical innovation that we consider adopting, we always have to remember that it always comes with a loss. So all you have to remember is that whenever you consider adopting a technique, you're going to gain something and you're going to lose something. Now, one may decide to go ahead and pursue the technological innovation because the gains seem to be more significant and more valuable than the losses. But very often they're not. And I think this is intuitively obvious to most people, right? If one is a parent of a young child, one might hesitate to give the child a calculator before they've learned addition and subtraction and multiplication. I think most parents would find that intuitively obvious. And the reason for that is we think there's something intrinsically valuable about knowing how to do basic arithmetic and subtraction. Or similarly, the GPS systems are very valuable, but you have to think twice about using those habitually because most people suspect that there's something intrinsically valuable about being able to orient oneself in one's physical environment, being able to navigate, right? So GPS can be valuable, but you should think twice about always relying on it. So it's the same kind of process we need to adopt when any technical innovation is tempting us. We always have to remember that we're going to lose something, and there should be a deliberate, intentional process where people and organizations think that through. What are we going to gain and what are we going to lose? And in many cases, I think people and individuals and organizations will come to the conclusion that what we're going to lose in terms of human skills, capacities, habits are more worthwhile than what we're going to. And the third thing we can do is more collective and society-wide, because work is so integral and central to mental health. We need to develop systems, structures, and organizations that preserve that vital work-reward relationship. That's very, very important. We always need to remember that bad things happen when work and reward is coupled. And we'll need to develop systems that bestow value upon work in ways that transcend or go beyond the economic value that work provides for employers. This is a society-wide project and not necessarily limited to clinical work, but it's something that I think psychiatrists and everyone needs to keep in mind. These discussions should be taking place globally and virtually everywhere, but one place where they are taking place is the Academy of Organizational and Occupational Psychiatry, which is a wonderful organization. And we'll be discussing all of these issues, or many of these issues anyway, at our upcoming annual meeting, and that will be in Chicago on March 7th at the University Club of Chicago, March 7th, 2026.